Cool. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris McCann. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Current Health. Before we get to our amazing guest, a quick introduction to Current Health. We're a global healthcare technology company. We operate on every continent. Our platform serves as the single point of insight into patient health outside of the hospital, using continuous vital sign monitoring and other health data to try and identify patient risk and deliver early intervention at scale. Now, the pandemic has exploded utilization and deployment of remote patient monitoring, digital health, and virtual care. And our guest today is a global expert on the subject who probably doesn't need an introduction. Dr. Eric Topol is the founder and director of the Scripps Research Translational Institute. He is the professor of molecular medicine and executive vice president of Scripps Research. As a researcher, he's published over 1,200 peer-reviewed articles with more than 290,000 citations and is one of the top 10 most cited researchers in medicine. Dr. Topol's principal scientific focus has been on the genomic and digital tools that can be used to individualize medicine. And I've never felt so inadequate, Dr. Topol, as reading that bio. I'm super excited to have you here today and learn from you. So thank you for joining us. For all of the audience, there's a Q&A button at the bottom, and please send in any questions and we'll try and get to them. So firstly, Dr. Topol, how are you doing? How has COVID-19 impacted your day-to-day?
Well, thanks, Chris. It's great to be with you. Thanks again for your kind introduction. I'm holding up. I think we're going to be seeing the beast of the B117 strain, super spreader strain that you all have been through in the UK. Fortunately, I've been through my vaccine dosing and I feel a little better about it now that I can withstand. But yeah, we know there's lots of bumps in the road still before we can get off the highway of this and get off in an exit ramp. So, it's one of these things that's a real test, a real marathon.
Absolutely. How has it impacted your day-to-day research and the research your lab's doing?
Well, interestingly, our labs are going full tilt. We have physical distancing rules, so not everybody is there at any one time like it used to be. But with that, we've kept up productivity. And as we've discussed, we've actually revved it up. I didn't know we could, but interestingly, there's a very deep commitment. I think that's what is going on here, that people are so excited about what they're doing to try to make contributions to advance our status overall, in the pandemic, whether it's in science side or the clinical trial side. So that I think explains, there's just a sense of dedication, commitment like I've never seen in all the years.
Yeah, and I think we see that in our own team, that the pandemic, any ability to try and impact or improve the situation with the pandemic is a real driving factor and keeps people super motivated. We're a year into the pandemic now, and I think there have clearly been some incredible advancements within healthcare, the vaccines, how we deliver healthcare as a model in a pretty short amount of time this year. What stands out to you as some of the biggest advancements that have happened over the last year?
Well, number one, obviously, with the vaccines, that was, I think, the greatest triumph in the history of medicine. If it isn't the greatest, it's up there. And because there was really an existential threat on a large population on the planet, and we've already had, so many millions of people who've died and suffered. So to get those vaccines, and now we have yet another one today, the Sputnik one that's tested in a large scale phase 3 trial in Russia published. So, we have now a growing number of very effective vaccines, many hovering at 90% or higher. That's a dreamlike level of efficacy. Now, after that, I think there's a big step down for things that, I mean, we validated how genomics are so important to track the pandemic, and that will be routine. The UK has really been the leader in that. And in fact, if it wasn't for the UK's work, we wouldn't even know we had this beast of a variant here now, the B117. So that has been another major contribution in science. The monoclonal antibodies that are not being used enough, but they could be life-saving. And I think we need to get in large quantities of them for those people who still wind up getting COVID infection and getting treated early. We've also learned a lot about how to do better to keep people alive. You know, the mortality through the UK's ICNARC and then now many other replications of that evidence means that we are approaching patients better. Like initially we were putting people on ventilators early with, you know, endotracheal tube and mechanical ventilation. Now that's held back, and we do proning and we do many other things before we get to that point. And that's made, along with better drug treatments like dexamethasone, much better outcomes. So that's my clinical science, learning from things that we, you know, a new disease, we never knew how it worked. So, you know, there's been a lot of advances, and I think overall it's a very more favorable picture. The only thing that's gotten in our way, the latest big bump, has been these new, or, you know, these tough variants that are basically reflecting the evolution of the virus because it's never been contained in the planet. And especially in places like South Africa and Brazil, the UK, and here in the US, these are the places where, because of the uncontained spread, that we're seeing this more accelerated evolution. For a year almost, the virus was nice and quiescent, and even though it had lots of mutations, they were innocent. Now they're nothing like that. They're much more problematic.
How do you think, you know, how the pandemic progresses over the next 3 to 6 months? You know, how will it change the?
Yeah, it's really,
response?
you know, I thought we were going to get out of the woods by summer, you know, by end of June. I think now we have these new challenges of the immune escape of the variants, particularly, you know, South Africa, Brazil, and then the hyper spread of the B117. So it's going to prolong things. I'm still optimistic. I tend to always be, you know, kind of more of the rose-colored glasses type, and I still think we'll be in pretty good shape in the fall sometime. But if the virus had just been stable and it didn't pose these new challenges, we would have gotten done earlier for sure. Now it's, you know, the efficacy drops down of the vaccines, so you got to get more people vaccinated, and then, you know, some of the vaccines may not provide this, what we call, you know, mucosal immunity, whereby it's sterilization, and we could generate a lot of carriers, and that's not good because that, even though it prevents illness, it doesn't prevent spread. So, you know, we have a few more things to tackle. We're going to get through it, but you know, whether we get this fully contained, so that it's a rare case, people aren't dying or getting very sick, you know, whether we can do that in this current year or whether that's going to extend in part to the next year, that's still a little iffy.
What do you think that means in terms of political response? You know, do you think that more needs to be done in response to these new variants, or, you know, how do you feel about the current, you know, societal response?
You know, I think the societal response has been inadequate. You know, we're talking about a lot of rich countries like, you know, yours and the US and many others. We could basically distribute really high quality medical grade masks to everyone, you know, whether it's N95s or KN94s or whatever, so that everyone would have them and be expected to wear them and enforce it. Now, here in the US, we do no enforcement about that, or about distancing, or about gatherings. And, you know, so we don't follow through with the things. And we have a lot of libertarians here who still think this is a hoax, who think this is like the flu or not even as bad. I mean, we got a lot of people that, and so if they're not basically, if they're not enforced to follow the public health measures, you know, like using a seatbelt when you're in a car, if, you know, People can't, block that. So how can they not comply with the needs? So we aren't doing that in our society. And it's abysmal because we have a very large minority of people who don't even believe that masks help, who won't wear them, who say it's impossible to wear a mask. I mean, just crazy stuff. So, right now, while we're trying to ramp up the vaccines, and you all have done a really great job in the UK on that. I mean, Israel is leading the world, but the UK has done exceptionally well. You even beat us to the punch as far as getting that first people in. And I'll never forget the not just the older woman, but William Shakespeare getting his vaccine there. It's pretty impressive. But we can't rely only on vaccination. We need the combination of mitigation plus vaccination. And so the societal response everywhere has been soft, outside of where it's contained, like in lots of Asia and Australia, New Zealand, it's well contained. But in Europe and in South America and in parts of Africa and North America, we could do much better.
Yeah. You talked a lot about the advancements in medical science for COVID, but one of the other changes we've seen is how healthcare is delivered. Healthcare, I think, often gets an unfair reputation that it's slow moving and models can't innovate. And we saw very quickly back in March and April almost a wholesale shift to deliver more healthcare outside the hospital and look at more virtual care models. So, where do you think there has been improvements in how we actually deliver healthcare, and how do you see that developing over the next kind of year or so?
Well, there's a lot of different parts to that story. One is you got to gather evidence. And so in change practice, people want to see some data and evidence usually. And so that's where we've taken the lead, or we learned a lot from the recovery trials in the UK, where, tested one thing after another quickly in large numbers of people and got the data out. We haven't done that. Our largest trials are very small compared to the ones that have been organized out of Oxford. So part of the thing is, gathering evidence as quickly as you can. So for example, in the US, we've given hundreds of thousands of people convalescent plasma, and we still don't even know if it does anything. There's no randomized trial that's clear on that, a lot of murky results. And it may even contribute to breeding the variant because you're basically putting more selection pressure on the virus. So we're really into this so-called digital trials, direct to participant.
Yep.
And that's, I think, exciting that we send sensors out, and or in one big one we're doing called Detect, we actually use smartwatches and fitness bands like Fitbit.
Yep.
And we've shown that we can detect COVID quite accurately using that. And we particularly now want to go to the cluster detection so we can prevent outbreaks, because as the vaccines get more and more used and we use the mitigation measures, we're going to get some containment, and then we want to know where's the next spot before it becomes a real big outbreak. And so we need sensors. The naive thing here is that test. It's all you hear about. Test. Well, the problem with that is it's a one-off at that moment in time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you need a continuous measure. That's where sensors come into play. And then, of course, if you know someone has COVID, you need sensors again, because you don't want to just reflexively put everybody in the hospital. We don't even, at times, here in Southern California, patients were being put into the gift shop and the conference table, and they were sitting in the ambulances outside in the parking lot, sick, waiting for hours to get in to be evaluated. That's how bad things were. So we can't have that. We need to be able to be using sensors to monitor people who are not critically ill, at home. That's where I know you all have been working on that. So, we're going to have to do some good agility, plasticity about how we approach, because we have a lot of data capture capability that we're not tapping into. Absolutely. And it's, like, for example, our trial with Detect, where In the US, we have about 40,000 people. Whereas in Germany, they have over 600,000. They used our earlier data for flu-like illness, and they did their own app and smartwatches. Anyway, the point here is that here in the US, it gets no respect. You know, at least in Germany, the UK, I mean, the Germany RKI, the Robert Koch Institute, they got behind it. And that's why so many people in Germany are donating their data. So we have to do better about nurturing the digital medicine era. It doesn't get the same embracement as many other points of progress in medicine and healthcare.
What do you think it means after COVID, or rather once the direct impact of COVID is dissipated? Do you think that the use of remote monitoring will continue?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think we saw back when I was working on creative destruction of medicine, I had written that telemedicine was going to be really big, and it took a pandemic to bring that out. And then everything was, kind of went for a while when there was very rigorous distancing, went to telemedicine to a degree and speed that we never had envisioned. But what it proved was that you could do, virtual visits and accomplish a lot. And they're going to stay. I mean, they'll get better because we'll transfer data, sensor data, eventually, lab and imaging data, so that visit will be data rich. It won't be just a chat. And so that's, I think, an extension of that is what we're going to see with remote monitoring, because there has been some, you all participated in doing some of that, but it's the way to go. That's why, even in that first book I did back almost a decade ago now, it's scary how long ago it was, but I talked about the hospitals will be gutted. The way we think of hospitals today, where large numbers of regular rooms, that part will be obsolete. I mean, the intensive care units and the emergency rooms will be needed. We'll need operating rooms. We'll need fancy imaging equipment and labs, but the biggest part of the hospitals will not be needed, because those non-acutely ill people can largely be monitored in the comfort of their home. And when we did the NHS review, and that was published back in early 2019, the number one most impactful use of AI in healthcare was that remote monitoring, in terms of the long-term implications. Because in the US, we spend $1.2 trillion a year on hospitals, 1.2 trillion.
Yeah.
And our number one cost is personnel, human resources. And if we didn't have all these hospital beds, it would be the most important advance that we could see in terms of getting high quality delivery of care without nearly as many people involved. Yeah. Now, does that mean we're going to get rid of doctors and nurses? No, but what it means is we're still on a steep growth curve. I mean, if you look at the jobs in the US in the last few years, the biggest jump has been in healthcare personnel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the same is in most other countries as well. So we need to come up with a better plan than just keep hiring more people and becoming the overriding cost of providing healthcare to the citizenry. I mean, it just doesn't work. I mean, we have the technology. Let's validate it. Let's find out the best way to use it and the best way to get best outcomes. But I do know one thing, having been a patient myself, no less, on the other side of the fence, it's sure a lot better being in your own home than being in a hospital room. I'll take the bedroom any day compared to the hospital room.
Why do you think it took a pandemic to make this happen? And I guess by connection, what do you think we need to do now as a healthcare system and as a society to make sure we maintain these positive changes that we've managed to achieve?
Well, I think, we all have to stand up and do the right rigorous research to prove, because we have a lot of doubting Thomases out there. They're naysayers. And to change, these areas of digital medicine and genomics are still considered alien to most healthcare professionals. Now in the UK, it's a little different because genomics has been much more widely accepted, and you have a health education England there. But in the US, we don't have any health education US, and we have a lot of people that don't want to get into genomics or digital medicine. And they're basically the same thing. I mean, genomics is just another digitization of people's data. So, we have to prove it and nail it. We have to provide unequivocal evidence, rigorous, and you have to keep doing it. And then finally, people will succumb and say, oh yeah, that's the state of the art. But until you have the evidence and the goods, we're going to have resistance.
Do you think there are specific populations that will benefit more or less? How do you think about population targeting?
Well, I mean, typically you have the most stand to benefit in the highest risk group. And so that's always a good way to prove things to get started. But ultimately, when we're talking about remote monitoring, I'm talking about all patients in the hospital that are not in the ICU or not in like the post-op recovery unit. And that's just because it's really the lower risk people are the perfect ones to be at home, but the moderate risks that are not, ICU level, they're well suited too. Here the highest risk may not be the way to start. You may just take, low, moderate, and kind of go. It kind of is the opposite of the way it's normally done, where you go after the extreme phenotype and you go, kind of back out from that.
What do you think are the benefits we should be looking for with this? I mean, obviously a lot of people, you've talked a lot about the clinical benefits, but what do you see as the big economic benefits that could come from this as well?
From the remote monitoring? Yeah, I mean, I think it's ginormous. I mean, I don't use that word too often. It's a big, the issue here is you've got, a third of most healthcare budgets dedicated mostly to this ICU, a non-ICU portion.
Yeah.
So, I think it really is an extension of telemedicine when you think about it.
Yeah.
That's a virtual encounter. This is a virtual continuous assessment. So I do think that this will be the biggest economic win, because you're talking about just an enormous, now here, we're at almost at 19% of our gross domestic product. It's healthcare. And out of that, we're talking about, a third or more that we could preempt from remote monitoring. So it's not as bad in other countries. We're the biggest wasteland of expenditures for healthcare, because we overdo everything, and we have administrative costs. I mean, it's kind of funny. When I was there on the NHS review, I asked about, well, can't you use AI to eliminate all these people that do the coding and the billing and all this back office work? And they said, we don't have any of those people. And here it accounts for 30% of our healthcare dollars. Okay, so our situation is very different than places like yours that have a national health service and a universal coverage, and don't persecute people for their bills and threaten to take away their house and their car and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you've talked about the fact you think there's an evidence gap still to make this sustainable. Do you think there are any technological or people or process issues remaining in making telehealth or remote monitoring mainstream?
Well, I do think with the technology has to be more advanced. So if you're going to do really good remote monitoring, the one vital sign we don't have is blood pressure, continuous blood pressure. We do need that, not in all people, but the ones where we're particularly worried about their hemodynamics and their physiology. So that would be one thing. The other thing is, what other, to customize the sensor for individuals. Like some people, they may need their glucose. Some people may need their walking and their, frailty being especially assessed. I mean, different people need, we shouldn't just think there's this sensor package that every single person gets the same package. No.
Absolutely.
The next thing is we have to do, much better AI analytics. So today it's very primitive. We basically are looking at, one level of data. Like what we really want to do is integrate everything. So you want to have the entire history of that patient. You want to have the continuous data, the imaging laboratory, if there is any genomic environmental data. I mean, every layer of data, which we don't do now. We're just picking, part of the stream here.
Yeah.
So as we get our arms around the data better, and we get the sensors further enriched and, individualized for the needs of that foreseen in that individual patient, we'll get there. I am very confident that, it'll take a number of years, but people will say in the future, someday, the hospital, hospital bed, what's that? Back in George Orwell once called the hospital as the antechamber to the tomb. I mean, that always stuck with me because I've always thought it would sure be great if we could avoid most hospitalizations. And I still think that we can more than ever. We didn't have technology to do that before, but we can now. I think there's another thing that people don't cue into, and that is, and we saw it during the pandemic, still seeing it now. When people have COVID, they can't see their relatives. And they die without even having their loved ones with them. I mean, this is a horror show. If we had been ready for this, we'd have these people in their home with their loved ones. And you know what? I bet that would be associated with better outcomes. A lot of physicians they kind of discount the importance of the emotional well-being of a person, and how that mental health of being with their family, their spouse, their friends, whatever, how much of a difference that makes in their outcome. I have a great respect for that. And so, that's another reason why we need to make this push, not just for the economists, but for the well-being of people. And that's another reason why I want to eliminate hospital bed.
And you touched on artificial intelligence there, and within medicine, you literally wrote the book on this. You wrote an amazing book last year called Deep Medicine. I know we were just talking about it before we started the webinar, but what you touched on the applicability of artificial intelligence within telemedicine, but what do you see as the problems that it can solve, and what do you see as the barriers to actually making that happen? Is it simply a matter of getting better data, or is there more to it than that?
Well, there's a lot to it, even more than what I wrote about. I can only fit in so much in a few hundred pages, and it's constantly being updated. But just to give you the skinny on it, this is about deep neural networks, and basically it's about input. And if your inputs are compromised or incomplete, so are your outputs. And so all this drive that we have, this extraordinary potential to increase accuracy, increase our ability to render patient diagnoses, the interpretation of scans and patterns in medicine, which are ubiquitous, and data, which we can't, as human beings, we can't get our arms around each person's data because there's so much of it, and it's just going to grow. And they're generating their own data through sensors and their genomes and microbiomes, and it's a flood of data that no human being, no matter how confident that person is, could possibly assimilate. So we are going to rely more and more on these deep neural networks. And so for me, that's exciting, but at the same time, we're still early in the process. But right now we're working with very compromised inputs. Now, the other thing about this is we're going to get there, and we're starting to see it in certain specialties. We're going to get there, and we're going to have algorithms that are just, really slick, but they also obviously need to be fully validated and under surveillance, because, they could also have adversarial attacks or glitches once they get used. The issue here, though, is that what we don't pay enough attention to is where this is going. That is that we're going to have these things. They're going to be part of mainstream medicine. But the bean counters, they're going to use this to make medicine more of a business than it already is, especially in this country, the US. Oh, well, then we want you to see more patients. Since you have these machines that help you, we want you to read more scans and more slides and on and on and on. So the biggest point I needed to get across in deep medicine is we can't let that happen. Medicine has eroded so much already in terms of the human bond, and the machines actually could make that better. It's the administrators, the overlords, could make it worse. We can't let that happen. We have to stand up to that.
I think that's fascinating, because one of the things I see discussed a lot about technology and AI is actually the opposite, the potential erosion of the human bond, and particularly with telemedicine, a concern about almost encouraging loneliness within our elderly population by keeping them at home and not bringing them in where they might see other people. And I think we've detected a almost nervousness from clinicians, physicians, nurses about the role of artificial intelligence within healthcare, how it might affect their own job role. How do you think we build trust with clinicians and physicians and nurses as we try and bring artificial intelligence into clinical practice?
Oh, well, you mean how do we kind of bring them along?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Pierce Keane there in the UK, who is an ophthalmologist and AI guru, he's one of my go-to friends and sources. He's organizing an online course for physicians and healthcare professionals. And there are some good, articles about that. I think what we're striving for, there's two parts to this story. One is at the medical school level, this should be part of the curriculum.
Absolutely.
So that people understand the nuances. They don't have to become, coders and deep into computer AI science, but they should at least understand the basics so that when they are using these algorithms to advance the care of their patients, that they know what are the loopholes. That is, the human in the loop is needed for anything that's significant. So that is good for no med schools that I know of have done this yet, at least in our country.
Yeah.
But now for all these, the vast plurality of healthcare clinicians are already out there. So we need to get them up to speed, and education is a big part of this. So we'll see. That online course, I think, is going to get ready and put out there soon. And we need more than just one. But the point is, quickly get people up to speed in a fun, don't take too long, get everybody, so they understand I tried to do that in the book, but that's was out a couple of years ago, and the field's going to keep evolving. So that's why having stuff that's on online course is a really good idea. But we have to incentivize people to take whatever it is, an hour or a couple hours, because I get assignments of these online courses. I hate them. I just hate them all the time. They're obligatory, but we want one that's so much fun and so cool that people want to do it. Like the buzz is, have you done it? It has to be like that.
Yeah, and certainly when I was at med school, there was no education. This wasn't part of the curriculum, and
Right.
it still isn't part of the curriculum here in the UK either. So I completely agree.
It really needs to be. And I got to know a lot of the AI experts in the UK in the efforts on that review, and you have deep talent. There's no question. You can lead the way in that. In fact, I encourage the NHS that, since you're the leaders in genomics, in the world. Why don't you also be the leader in AI while you're at it? So I hope that's going to happen there.
And you have a unique perspective because you obviously wrote the Topol review for the NHS. How do you see the NHS and the American healthcare system differing when it comes to digital health and AI?
Well, just to be clear, I had about 50 people I got to work with, and some incredible colleagues that were. Well, I didn't just write it. I had lots of help. I was I was thrilled because I was the only non-UK person involved, but I also started to become a lot of new friends there that were extraordinary, and they put in so much work. Now, what I learned is that you have a more favorable position to advance medicine than almost anywhere else, but certainly in the US. The reason is that you have the will, commitment, like genomics kind of tells the story. You're so far ahead in so many respects. The UK Biobank, Genomics England, you have an education wing that gets the clinicians up to speed. So some people in this country, they're disparaging about the UK. They have no idea what they're talking about. And what I saw was, whoa, I mean, if we could only be as good as what you all are doing. So I had a window into something that was pretty extraordinary. And I also saw it across the board: digital, robotics, AI, and the intense dedication and commitment to do better. No complacency whatsoever. That's the right attitude. And so, and as we talked about, if you don't have a commitment to education, and the only thing I thought was the education commitment at NHS is for the clinical community. I'd like to see that extended to the public.
Absolutely.
We don't have any of that. We have no education for anybody, but that's something really important. This whole idea of the level playing field between patients and clinicians, that's another part of the AI story that they have the sensors, but they also have the data and the algorithmic support, so they can make their own diagnoses, at least screening. And if they need help, they can contact a clinician.
Yeah. Coming back to the American healthcare system, all of this data that you're talking about us starting to be able to collect, how do you think this will impact the individual health system in America? How do you think it will change, their organizational structure? Do you think you'll see them starting to hire, machine learning engineers? How will it change their business almost and how they're delivering healthcare?
It's hard to know. I mean, we're early on here. I can't emphasize that enough. And it's a little unpredictable where this is headed. I hope it's, in a very positive way, but there's no assurance for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, last question, there's a couple of questions from the audience, but, one of the things I think we have seen as a company a lot this year is almost an intersection between this decentralization of healthcare delivery and telemedicine, but also with clinical research. And you spoke about direct patient trials right at the start of this. Do you think we'll see, a continuing change in direct to patient recruitment and decentralized clinical research?
Yeah.
How do you see that impacting your role as a researcher?
Well, I'm actually really excited about that. The disintermediation of the need for doctors and nurses and coordinators and all that, because the clinical trial apparatus is very labor intensive and expensive and time consuming. And again, here you go. It wouldn't work for like an investigational drug, but it works really well. Like if you're trying to find out about COVID, or you're trying to develop an algorithm for individualization of glucose, or sleep disorders, or high blood pressure, or all these common things. So the point here is that we can go so fast, so cheap, getting people's data right back to themselves. And this is part of that, not just a digital medicine advance, but the citizen science. Most people want their data, they want to be empowered, and that's what this plays into, DTP, direct to participants. And I think it's the most exciting thing to happen in clinical research in a long time. And we did a trial, M-STOPS, and published a few years ago when we diagnosed atrial fibrillation in thousands of people who were at high risk, but they didn't even know it.
Wow.
And we just sent them, first we found the people at risk and got them to consent online. And then we sent them a patch to put on their chest for 10 days or so. And we diagnosed all this atrial fibrillation. And those people, some of them, had a stroke prevented. And they never would have come to awareness. So the power of directed participants, now that we can send out a sensor and identify people through risk through their electronic records at scale, worldwide, there's nothing holding us back. The only thing is thinking little. Thinking little is the only thing holding us back here.
Do you think that, how do you think the pharmaceutical companies will embrace this? Do you see them embracing it as well? Or do you think it will speed up drug discovery?
Well, I don't know if it would, for drugs that are not, for investigational drugs, you still have to bring them in and give them the drug, or they have to be tightly followed. It could be useful, to see the effect of the drug, out in the real world. That's the other thing here. You got continuous data or high frequency data, real world, not in some, clinic visit. So yes, the biopharma has embraced this model, or beginning to embrace it, but of course, for particular purposes, so to use it as efficacy measures of a new drug, but not the drug per se, so it's a little different. Here, studying a condition by directed participant is easier than studying a new drug.
Yeah.
There have been some studies, like even with COVID, prophylactic use of drugs sent in the mail at scale.
Yeah.
So we've seen it in COVID, but they were repurposed drugs that are widely available. They weren't new drugs.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions from the audience. The first one is from George Margelis, who said, with the high prevalence of COVID in the United States, I understand the value of sensors. However, in Australia, where there is very low prevalence, the specificity of sensors for COVID is a limiting factor. And is there a role for AI in using multiple data points from various sources to improve the specificity of the sensor data?
Yeah, well, we actually have Detect has been launched in Australia through University of Sydney. But the point being made there is really important. You don't ever want to rely on one level. It's incomplete input. If you're just looking at sensors, what about wastewater?
Yeah.
Now you can not only pick up if it's changing the virus, but also the variants in the wastewater. And it's very low cost and very straightforward. You have mobility. You have multiple levels of data from people. Whether it's, if you add up wastewater, mobility, the sensors for heart rate and physical activity, you've also got self-reported symptoms or electronic health records. There's just a lot of data. So the point being is, in Australia, there will be new outbreaks. There already have been.
Yeah.
They've got it under great control, but it isn't eliminated and it won't be eliminated. This is an endemic virus for years to come. So how do you develop a system? And this is using AI with recurrent neural networks. Basically, you can, a multi-layered model is way you deal with this data, and eventually that will be the norm, and that'll be what's expected. But no place has done that yet. We're still in this one lane, sensor lane, a symptom self-reported lane. Nobody's pulled this together yet.
Yeah, I think we've seen that as one of the biggest challenges as we've tried to build out our platform is how do you bring all of the data together, because one sensor data, one sensor doesn't give you enough information to be really sensitive and specific, and it's super challenging bringing all that into one place to really get the context on that
Yeah,
information.
absolutely.
The last question that's come in is, we've obviously had a long and exhausting 2020. What are you most excited about for 2021 and 2022? What makes you motivated and keep going?
Well, I do think we're going to see more big science advances. We've been working on these pan-virus strategies to just basically knock out coronaviruses and other families of the future with these broad neutralizing antibodies. So, I mean, I think we're going to just keep getting smarter. There's no shortage of human intelligence here and responsiveness. I am, looking forward to at some point on this year that we'll have some semblance of pre-pandemic life, and that'll be great. We need it badly. We needed it months ago, but we'll get there. Our biggest issue is, I'm the most impatient person of anyone, I think, and I've had to learn to be patient and hang in there and not to, expect things to happen overnight. But I'm confident. I look to, even they asked about what do you think this year is going to be like, and I said I think it's going to come in like a lion, which it has, go out like a lamb, and I think that's what we're looking at, and I'm excited about that. And I don't look at it as we've lost 2 years of life and lost a lot of lives. I mean, yes, it's true. I look at it as, for generations ahead, we've learned a hell of a lot, and it's going to help our species, hopefully our planet for the future.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to finish up. I just want to say a massive thank you to you, Dr. Topol. I learn more every time I speak to you. We really appreciate all of your time and the insights you've shared. And to everyone else, thank you for joining, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day and stays safe and well as we come through this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chris, and good luck to you and your colleagues at Current Health.
Thanks, Dr. Topol. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Bye-bye now.
Bye all.